going to get started. My name is Scott Polikov. I'm a town planner and a board member, and we've put together this presentation really to kind of dive deep into alternative ways to get projects done. There's no right answers. I believe that, frankly, whether there was 10 of us in here or 1,000, I'd say this, we're really making this stuff up right now as we go along. Shannon, in the plenary, you sort of said to have the courage to get people to go there. I don't even think it's a question of courage. I just think it's a question of just being honest with ourselves that the old rules don't work anymore. There's not enough money under the old system. Even the political horse trading that's done either at the MPO governing body level or at the city council level or at the state legislature level or at the congressional level, there's not even enough money now for the good old-fashioned horse trading to occur. You got to have a certain level of money for you to be able to trade projects, right? So, you know, there's this big cry that we have to eliminate earmarks for political reasons, for fiscal reasons. But politically, if you don't have enough money to trade earmarks, then everybody gets a little of what they want. So I think that is the classic necessity is the mother of invention. And so I asked Mathew McElroy, who heads up planning for the city of El Paso, and Matt Sibul, who's the planning mastermind between for UTA, the Utah Transit Authority here, both of whom are gentlemen who are consistently taking risk. Mathew didn't get the memo that he wasn't supposed to actually make developers successful, and Matt Sibul didn't get the memo that transit authorities aren't supposed to be worrying about things outside of the rail right-of-way. So we're going to get some insight from both of them. Then I'm going to close with a very brief case study about switching the roles of the developer and the city in terms of local infrastructure. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Matt. Sorry, Matt Sibul.
Thanks. Good morning. I am going to take you through some sort of case studies that we've looked at locally as we've developed our transit system, and talk a little bit about some of the innovative things that we've tried. Some things haven't worked, and then later want to just take any questions you might have. So hopefully you've all had a chance to kind of kick the tires of our system here in Salt Lake. Thank you for checking it out. We are in the midst of, we're just finishing up actually a tremendous building boom in our system that we call our Frontlines 2015 program. So it's the biggest rail expansion we've ever done. And we just opened up the fourth of these 5 lines you see here. The airport TRAX line opened up just about a month and a half ago. And then our Draper line is opening up. It's the extension of our north-south original light rail system, opening up in August of this year. So where we are currently, if you start to look at what we've done, we kind of have to pinch ourselves that in Salt Lake City, in conservative Utah, we've been able to build this kind of network. And we're not done by any means. We want to do a lot more. But we've got a legitimate system here. And again, this is in Utah, in the arguably the most conservative state of the nation. I mean, perhaps my colleagues would argue with me about Texas, but between Texas and Utah, okay, we, you know, this is the state where, you know, taxes are low, regulations don't really exist, and there's the attitude of I want government off my back and out of my pocketbook. So we've been able to do this in Utah, and so this was my first message, and I think everyone kind of gets this, that if you sell the right thing and you give people what they want and you're consistent with what you deliver, transit investments and the kinds of things that we do as professionals can work in conservative states. Our recipe for success here as an agency, a transit agency, has been very much focused on delivering what we've said we would. So projects, those projects that I showed in the map have all been delivered generally on time and under budget. And that's kind of been our theme over the past 15 or so years that's allowed us to go to the legislature and get additional taxing authority that the public has supported through referenda that have generally passed in the 70% kind of range. And again, we're not done, so we're still, it's a recipe that's worked in the past, and we hope to go back to do that some more. I'm going to focus a little bit on the airport TRAX line. Have any of you had a chance to ride the green line to or from the airport or on North Temple? Excellent, thank you. Most people here. And Mathew here is going to take it back out to the airport this afternoon. So this turned into, this was sort of a, I guess I'll call it a plain vanilla light rail project that really blossomed into something that is transformative on North Temple. And our airport is pretty close to the downtown core. It's about 6 miles away. And again, so it's a very fast travel time. But the project, again, sort of took new life when the city stepped up and said, you know, we don't want this just to be a light rail project down the middle of North Temple. We want to transform and make this project a true gateway into Salt Lake City. And so the North Temple Viaduct was the first aspect of this. This is a picture of the old viaduct. This is looking south down a street called 400 West. And this structure dated to the early 1960s. There were signs basically on either side of the bridge that were saying, watch for falling debris when you walked underneath. And this bridge needed to be replaced. I think
does that sign help with liability or help with liability?
And if you look closely, there's actually a troll under this bridge. This bridge was so nasty, it needed to come down. But there was no way to do it. There was no money in the budget. But the city and UTA and the state of Utah stepped up, and this was a $67 million betterment, if you will, on this airport TRAX line. And so an assessment district was set up, value capture around the bridge area. The state of Utah kicked in $20 million. The legislature knew what this bridge was about. The city stepped up, and then we took some risk as well. And then another thing that was really unique about the particular, this North Temple Bridge was that we entered into a very different kind of agreement with the city and our contractor, Stacy Whitbeck Kiewit, a joint venture contractor. And we said, look, it took us a long time, a lot of innovation to come up with the $67 million to build this bridge. We can't afford a penny more, but can we make it come in under $67 million? So we set up an alliance agreement which said that if that project comes in under $67 million, we all share in the savings. And so, but if it comes in any amount over that, we all share in that risk. And so everyone was really incentivized to make the project work. And it came in $10 million under budget. So we all shared about $3 million of savings. The city plowed it right back into the corridor, did more additional betterments on the bridge, did some really unique lighting. If you get a chance to see this bridge at night, it's absolutely stunning. There are, the city could put on a light show. There are LED lights that can be programmed, and it's almost like fireworks going off on this bridge. It's absolutely amazing. And this is, I just took this photo yesterday looking, this is looking towards the city from the west. So this bridge, I think, turned out phenomenally for us. So again, this is a particular subset of a bigger project, but there was a vision the city had, and there was no money to pay for it, but we sat down and over the course of a couple months rolled up our sleeves and then identified these different sources of money to get that sub-project done. Another example I'm going to talk about just for a minute is the the Sugar House Streetcar project, which we're building our very first, it's a starter streetcar system here. Like many American cities, there used to be 140 miles of streetcars. So this is our first 2 miles of reliving streetcar. This is going to open up in December of this year. It's a project that we got I don't know if there are any tours of this, probably not since it's under construction, but it's in the southern part of Salt Lake City in what's called the Sugar House area, which is probably the hottest area of Salt Lake City as far as the market and real estate and so forth. And this is in an old abandoned railroad right-of-way that we own, and so most of the businesses back onto it, old industrial areas that are being completely rehabbed. There's a picture of it under construction right now. But it's one of those things where we won Salt Lake City really stepped up, and they won a Tiger grant back in the Tiger 2 days for $25 million. The only problem with that was that the project cost $45 million. And so we were all very ecstatic that we got a Tiger grant, and then it's a matter of trying to figure out how to bridge that gap. So again, we rolled up our sleeves with our partners, South Salt Lake City, the redevelopment authority of Salt Lake City really stepped up, set up a tax increment financing district, pulled money out of their general fund. There was some creative financing South Salt Lake City did. The county stepped in and said, we don't want this to just be a rail corridor with development. We want a wonderful trail system to connect the East Bench area with the Jordan River Parkway. And so they stepped up and actually put a ballot initiative before the voters last year, which passed. So that allowed us to actually tap into other sources of dollars to really make this project all-inclusive for all of the stakeholders. And then UTA, from our perspective, we threw in some of our vehicles and the right-of-way and then took on some additional project risks. So again, it was this unique, very different from the North Temple Viaduct project I just talked about, but a way for us to really leverage each other's dollars and even some small dollars that they got people really excited about that project. We're really betting our future on not just building new products, the supply side, if you will. This graph shows, it's a little hard to see, the orange band is our growth in ridership over the next, we're projecting the next 30 years, just based on the development that we all believe in this room and all want to make happen. So we're really doubling down on transit-oriented development. We've done some studies and looked at the economic development areas along the lines that we've already built. And this is a little bit hard to see, but we've done a real quantitative analysis. This is the university line that connects, so to the right there, it actually threads through downtown and goes up to the University of Utah. We've quantified all the development that's happened since this line was built in 2002, and it's somewhere along the lines of $700 million. And so and we can't take credit for all that at the transit agency. The city obviously has stepped up immensely, but it's a story that really sells to developers. It sells to politicians because it talks about, again, the return on investment through these public dollars that are spent. We have, a couple of years ago, our legislature gave us the authority to enter into joint venture partnerships with developers. And so we've got a couple pilot projects going where we take our land and throw it into a joint venture and then develop properties around our transit stations. And so this is still in its early stages. I can't show you any actual product that's come out of the ground yet, but we've got 3 or 4 in the hopper right now. Example down in Suburban, a little bit south of here in Sandy. And then this is on North Temple. So we've seen, even just in the North Temple corridor, we've seen examples, and this project's only been open for, like I said, a month and a half. So we've really focused on telling the economic development story and just telling the story in general about the transformative value of land use and transit investments. And it really sells, and that's worked for us. And so I just wanted to tell you that that's kind of our one of our main takeaways. So that was what I had.
Great. Thank you. That's great. After Mathew and I present, then we'll open up to discussion. You know, for those of you who know me, I'm on a mission to really begin to create an opportunity for this organization to, I love the word takeaways in your presentation, Matt, because that's really what we need to begin to do. So 2 takeaways that you kind of had embedded in there that weren't the global ones are for public-private partnerships, which that's what your alliance agreement was all about. That should be the norm. You know, think about it. The notion of public-private partnerships is not taking an availability payment and going out and finding private money and banking it. That's banking. That's not public-private partnerships. A public-private partnership is sharing risk and shifting risk and assigning risk, and that's what I love about that alliance agreement. That was great. That was maybe the most important thing I've learned so far in the way you structure that in terms of this Congress. I think the other thing is that as federal dollars become more and more limited, you're going to have, I think, regardless of who the next president is, I think you're going to have a Tiger-like process emerge through reauthorization. I don't think we'll ever fundamentally reauthorize again the way we did, because there's not enough money to allocate to authorize 5, 6, 7 years worth of federal dollars. So I think we're going to probably see more of a permanent competitive, regardless of whether they call it Tiger or not. I think those cities that are prepared to figure out how to leverage a stipend or a grant that comes through a competitive process are the ones that are going to get the money. And I think what's happened is a lot of people freaked out when we had the same problem when we helped get the Dallas Tiger Grant Streetcar. Dallas and Dart at first were mad. We got $25 million and we're going to have to spend 45 or 50. Well, flip it around. They found the other 25 or 30 and they're under construction too. That's the other takeaway. Instead of being surprised that the feds can't fully fund your project, be prepared for it. Now we're going to have Mathew, who's also a new national, recently a board member, a colleague, and I'm really excited to have somebody with Mathew's innovation on the national board. And the El Paso story is quite a story. And so if I can get the computer to work. Mathew.
So I'm going to back up a little bit so that what I think the El Paso story is really instructive in is understanding that public-private partnerships, P3s, can exist at the micro scale as well, because you have to get the big part of the project done, but if nothing happens along the corridor, a lot of that investment ends up getting wasted. So that you understand the place that we're talking about and why the micro scale is so important. El Paso, Texas is a city or a county of about 832,000. The city itself is about 70% of that, or I should say about 80% of that. Right across from El Paso, Texas is Ciudad Juarez, Mexico. It's about 1.5 million people. Tens of thousands of people cross the bridge on a daily basis for working and shopping. The city of El Paso is also the safest city in the United States, has been for several years. But the thing about El Paso is that El Paso is 85% Hispanic, as you can probably tell. But aside from being 85% Hispanic, it also trails the state and nation in terms of median household income. And so when you see those mega projects going up in other places, those kinds of projects are particularly difficult to implement in El Paso, not just in downtown, but in the traditional core of the city. So our story sort of starts in coming up with what many people have called the best smart growth plan in America. We had to get from that plan to a place where my slide disappeared. The computer's fighting me, Scott. It's completely gone now.
There it is.
Oh, here we go. So to give you a little bit of background, additional background, the city of El Paso, pre-World War II was like many cities in the West, grow at the edge, grow at the edge, grow at the edge. And what our plan, the plan El Paso was different in terms of it really refocused an interest on downtown, really refocused an interest on redeveloping the core of El Paso, which is where the micro scale becomes important. So we had that model of development on the top where we had an abandoned downtown and single-family detached on every edge of the city. And what we really wanted to try to get back to was the sort of Leon Creer model of take what's best in your city and replicate it. And so we did that through two ways. First, through bus rapid transit, and our comprehensive plan includes all of this stuff. But you can see that there were major transit facilities planned in the Mission Valley, the Far East Terminal, the airport, 5 Points, the Downtown Transfer Center, Glory Road, and the West Side. And the area that I'm going to focus on, none of my slides are working at all. So this is the Mission Valley smart code plan. But the streetcar was going to focus particularly on a corridor that we call the Oregon Corridor. The Oregon Corridor connects our downtown to two universities. It's El Paso Community College, the downtown campus, and the University of Texas at El Paso, and then two major hospitals, and then the university's entertainment district. And part of that, it's a $90 million project. The design is about 98% at this point. It's actually taking the 1920s PCC Art Deco cars, sending them to Portland to get completely refurbished. They'll put engines in the front and the back so they can go two directions. But 9 of them were actually stored out at the airport, and you can see a completely refurbished one that's actually on the streets in San Francisco, from what I understand.
Matthew, were those the cars that actually went across the bridge
Yes.
and connected both Juarez and El Paso?
Right, and so as we think about phase 2 of the streetcar, it's really important that we think not just about connecting downtown to the Oregon Corridor and the university, but reconnecting El Paso back to Juarez. And so this is a streetcar route, so you can see that on the far right, that's our downtown, and then the corridor that runs further up into the city passes the two universities, 2 hospitals, and then 2 traditional neighborhoods that we call Rim and Kern Place. It also comes with a maintenance facility that's going to be in the downtown. We'll be breaking ground in 2014. So this is where we get to that micro scale that's important. TIFs and tax increment reinvestment zones are great, but typically when you want to do a deal, you have to go to that particular board, and then that particular board decides whether they're going to invest in a particular project. And we got around, this is just the plan. So we got around that in a pretty innovative way. In Texas, you have the ability to do these things called Chapter 380 agreements, which are individual grants back to individual property owners. And so in El Paso, the way that it works on the micro basis is we have 3 specific areas. One, the core of downtown. If you do a project in downtown that is a 3-story building that's $2.25 million or a $250,000 renovation, there's a couple of tiers. If it's a historic building, it's 15 years. You get the city's portion of property taxes back and the county's. You get, if it's ground floor retail because we want an active street, you get all of the city's portion of sales tax rebated back to you. For all of your construction materials, we will rebate back to you the city's portion of sales tax. So every revenue stream that comes into the city, we rebate back to the property owner. We do the same thing in several of our city centers, and the one that I'm going to focus on is the Glory Road one. The Glory Road one is that Oregon corridor that I was talking about. This is where it became particularly important at the micro level to understand what developers needed to do these projects, because you saw that really old apartment building. When we looked specifically at what it would take to get one of those projects done, developers were telling us, because El Paso is a second-tier market, they needed a 20% return on investment. If they really loved El Paso, they would take about 12%. If you look at what it cost to renovate the building and get it up and get it to the kind of product that we wanted, the project just didn't pencil. And so we had to come up with an incentive program that worked for them. So along the Oregon corridor, you get basically the downtown deal, but the downtown deal for 5 years, so that people can begin to do projects. It puts that money right back in the hands of the developer to get incremental projects done. So this is basically the deal. Medical Center of the Americas is 7, but the Oregon corridor is 5. The other thing that we had to do is adopt the International Existing Building Code. How many people in here have the International Existing Building Code adopted in their cities? Have you gone through the local amendment process? If you have not gone through the local amendment process, because each city is sort of unique, we had the International Existing Building Code on the books, but had not brought in the structural engineers and architects who were actually doing redevelopment projects in our city to refine the code. We did that, brought in every good structural engineer, brought in every good local architect who was doing those kinds of projects, went through the local amendment process, and voila, people actually started using it. So this, plus those incremental basically mini TIFs to get individual projects done have been exceedingly helpful in terms of getting projects done for us. And that's all I've got.
Great.
Matthew, that was fantastic. My takeaway from Matthew's story is we have to abandon the notion of what the public sector's responsibilities are and the private sector's responsibilities. Is it a developer giveaway to give 100% effectively rebates of tax revenue generated in a corridor that otherwise wouldn't be seeing new investment? I mean, you're not giving away something that wouldn't have occurred otherwise. And, you know, it's interesting, Matt, you talked about the notion of, you know, a conservative state Utah, conservative state Texas. Yes, Oklahoma's conservative, and so is Arizona. But in those three states, and to some extent starting actually in Oklahoma, we're doing some work in Oklahoma City now. In conservative states, I actually think we're seeing more innovation than in the traditional states that have a fundamental distrust between government stepping out of its public role and the private stepping out of its private role. Actually, I think the more conservative states are starting to really blur those lines, and that's what I want to talk about briefly, and then we can open this up for discussion in another similar context. Sorry. Okay, come on. By the way, that's not my Porsche. I saw that in the streets of Hong Kong. So, you know, purple Porsche in Hong Kong next to the purple bus, you can't, you know, you get bored putting up your city stuff. Let's find it here. Here we go. So the story here, I'm going to keep the same theme going. I'm going to talk about two quick case studies. Both are in infill environments in what would be considered normally the other side of the tracks. And I think to me this is probably the most important issue that we need to start to grapple with. Shannon, you were talking about that at the plenary today. The notion that if you have a medium demographic environment, in other words, the median income, mixed race, mixed residential environments, somehow are not in a position to create successful development. We're just lying to ourselves. And to some extent, there's still I don't think it's intentional, but there's still this kind of jingoistic or racist kind of element to it. And I'm not projecting onto any in particular person, but what I think is happening is that we're not giving the infill environments their due attention to create the ability to attract the demand that's actually there. It's in the market. It's just we're not facilitating the ability for that demand to be attracted in those locations, whether it's at the micro scale or the public scale. So in this first example, this is the east side of Fort Worth, where this is really the private acting for the public interest. Our client is a gentleman who bought a sand and gravel pit on the Trinity River just outside of the first ring loop in Fort Worth, which is now very much, you can see where that blue arrow is pointing in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, is very much an infill location. And he started mining sand and gravel, and then he finished the mining and he created lakes and generated some beautiful starter homes in this mixed income, mixed race environment. And the Army Corps of Engineers said, if you dig us out another 40-acre lake for some more valley storage, some watershed management upstream and downstream, because the Trinity River Basin is the main basin for flood control between Dallas and Fort Worth, we'll take 175 acres of development out of floodplain. So that's the plan we did after a market study. The northern boundary of that property is the Trinity Railway Express commuter line. There is a train going every hour to downtown Dallas and downtown Fort Worth. There's no stop there. The southern boundary is one of the few unchannelized areas of the Trinity River. That is old-growth river bottom. The left side is, of the property is Loop 820. That's highway frontage of an inside loop roadway system. And now he has a lake. A highway, a river, an operating transit rail line, and a lake. And all he was getting from the brokers was, just give us the corner, we'll do the Chili's, we'll do the grocery store maybe, and we're going to do it the way we want to, because bringing a grocery store to this part of Fort Worth is, you know, frankly, going to be a challenge. Really? This site's between downtown Fort Worth and DFW Airport and next to Bell Helicopter's world headquarters, and this is going to be a challenge to do a grocery store? So instead of him selling off to a fee developer, we convinced him, you're already doing homes around your lakes. Why don't we keep you in the deal? We did a private form-based code for him, and we began to suggest to him that if we created a destination and not just a bunch of frontages around the hard corners of the highway and the regional arterial you can see that goes through the middle paralleling the railroad called Trinity Boulevard, that maybe someday, and you can see in the blue-purple on the bottom left, you could create a demand for this location for office, second-tier employment from Bell Medical Hospital, which if you just tried to position that from the scratch, you'd never be competitive with all of the other locations in Dallas-Fort Worth for office. But if you created a neighborhood environment where there's demand for what Dan Perola calls the missing middle, make it easy to do the missing middle housing, and then maybe someday you go from a surface-parked environment for some urban 30 to 35 units to the acre residential, maybe someday we can actually then make the case if we can bring money to the table to get the rail stop there, and we can then have the market for the dense podium parked residential. A very specific long-term successional strategy. We know demand's there for all those pieces, but if they're not phased at the micro level, you'll never achieve that. Here was the problem. This regional arterial that parallels the rail line and a major east-west highway that goes over to DFW Airport and over to downtown Fort Worth looks like this. This is exactly what it looks like today. It's 4-lane. The city of Fort Worth has it in their capital improvements program as I love this term, since my days serving on an MPO, I've always loved this, as a 6-lane MAD. 6-lane major arterial divided. I love that, 6-lane MAD. And this is a 6-lane MAD in south side of Fort Worth, South Hewlin, lane, median, lane, right? And so if we were to actually implement that, it would destroy the capacity for the development vision that we established market realities for in terms of our market studies and our successional phasing and the private form-based code, which gives now the developer 175 acres as a matter of right for mixed use with no future public hearings on site plans because we've done so much of the detail on the front end through the form-based approach. The other thing is they don't have any money, so you're locked in at a double loss. You can't do anything but the 6-lane MAD because it's on the thoroughfare plan, but we're not even going to get to it for 25 years. So what we did is we said, look, we privately rezoned form-based. We established through an investment-grade market study the development outcomes. We showed that instead of Mr. Newell lotting out another 1,000 single-family homes, we could develop this successional village environment over time. Using the ITE manual, which has been adopted as policy by the state of Texas, by the city of El Paso, by the city of Fort Worth, we said, you know what, this doesn't need to be a 6-lane divided. It needs to be a 4-lane avenue. We established that through an analysis that Kim Lee Horn did with us. And we said, you know what, be our partner. And I think the mechanisms are not critical. There was a TIF, but it was a city-initiated TIF. But basically, we did it through a development agreement under the TIF. And we said, through an underwriting, we can establish that in this location, with form-based in place, on a highway, on a river, on a rail, with a lake, I bet you we could actually add another $300 to $400 million in development here. So the city's economic development team agreed. We entered into a reimbursement strategy where the risk stays, this is critical, the risk stays on the developer for a $75 million reimbursement for the essential infrastructure you're looking at, including 100% reimbursement for the redesign and reconstruction of that arterial, which is 6 feet under the floodplain, by the way. He went to London to a group called Quint. We raised $12 million, 10 years at 8% on a reimbursement basis based strictly on the performance of the tax base. I mean, that's good. So there's good money looking for good projects out there. You can see that this is how we designed the roadway. This is exactly what it'll look like. You'll come here, you'll turn in here, you'll have the urban grocery store, the first phase of the surface parked urban residential, you'll have Ken's new office. But what we've done now is we've increased the walking shed all the way over to all this development, which is the opportunity now for the missing middle neighborhood residential types to be the transition to the single family that's already in place. That's the key. So that's moving forward. We're under design and construction. It's being treated as a developer road. The developer agreement allows us to move forward. Ken's acting as his own general contractor as long as we follow minority contracting requirements. It's a developer road, not a capital road. We're going to do it in the next 9 months. We're under design. We hope to be under construction by the end of the year. The other one is another interesting, it's ironically on the same line. This is the same commuter rail line from Dallas to Fort Worth, downtown Irving. Many years ago, a gentleman by the name of McDougal, former mayor of Texas Tech. I'm sorry? Yes, Lubbock. Thank you, Michael. Came in and through a development agreement was given a bunch of property in downtown. They raised a bunch of apartments, which was a tragedy, frankly. Classic urban renewal. The recession hit. The gentleman had to give up McDougal had to give up the property. What it did is it created, you can see in red, this is the existing east-west rail line. This is the historic downtown of Irving, which is traditionally a suburban community between Dallas and Fort Worth. But the downtown has good downtown bones. This is an existing stop. This operates today as a great stop. And someday there's a rail line that can go up, maybe with the DART system, up to Love Field and DFW Airport. But all the red are now public lands. And the reason I'm showing you this is there are a lot of public lands owned at the micro scale in downtowns. The tendency, though, or in infill areas, or in old edge city locations where there were public facilities that have now been abandoned. The key for me is that we don't need to focus on an assemblage strategy. I think the days of the day of Cherokee coming in and telling the local governments just buy up all the land, give us the ability, remember, it didn't quite work out. But to the extent you have public lands around core downtowns, these are the opportunities for the missing middle. So instead of going for highest bid, which is, I think, the mistake, it's back to the theme that Mathew laid out. Instead of going for the highest bid or, by God, we're not going to share any tax revenue because that's government, that's general fund. What we did is we helped the city write a request for bid that were based on these outcomes so that it wasn't high bid. Conformity to the vision, value of development, tax base, visitors, new residents, catalyzing adjacent development. And the key was we literally put this in the request for bid document. We developed some scenarios of the missing middle housing that could be developed on the red properties, the city properties, to transition from the old historic single-family neighborhood into the CBD. And we've recently received those proposals, and we said, deliver the missing middle, developers and home builders. And we'll look at the full impact and not just high bid. There's another set of scenarios that we attached. You don't have to do it this way, but you've got this major piece of property next to a park. Do you want to save the trees? Do you want to do some cottage courts? Do you want to do some townhomes? What's the market going to tell us that can be done? And so this was, I think, an innovative way to test the market. Now, they were afraid, what happens if we don't get any takers at this point? I said, that's good information to have. That means it's premature. It's premature with the bar you set in terms of the outcome of what you want to have with that public land to transition that land into private ownership. That's telling us something. It means we've got to do other things. And in fact, now what we're doing is there's a major one-way pairs that goes through. It's too wide. We've got to narrow that down. We've got to do some zoning reforms. But we'll see how that plays out. My takeaways are, bottom line, we should start to think in terms of treating the public capital projects as developer projects. Be willing to shift, if you're on the public side, risk with return to the private side, whether it's a contractor or whether it's a private developer, and say, you know what, we're going to accelerate the project, we're going to give you more design diversity, we're going to give you participation on maybe a reimbursement basis, but you need to execute now and deliver the project. 2, facilitating predictability across multiple ownerships. To me, this is everything. There's no one formula, but instead of assembling property, using form-based to create property-to-property adjacencies. Down the Oregon corridor, for the Glory Road corridor, for example, especially when you're challenged with the perception and reality of more of an affordable level, long-term build-out, if I, as an investor, if I'm approached by my development partner, if he or she says, I've got this great idea, I want to do $5 million in this new restaurant and 4 units behind, and they say, what's going to happen next to me? And you say, I don't know. They're not going to underwrite successfully the equity or the debt. What Mathew's project has shown is that you can create de facto assemblage without destroying small ownerships through zoning, regulation, and micro incentives. And then finally, I think this is everything. We're all starting to talk about in different ways, seeding the missing middle. The notion that there are 2 types or 3 types of residential. You know, the fact that only 20% of the 40 million housing transactions over the next 30 years are going to be the nuclear family. Are we delivering to that 80% that are non-traditional? And I think it's government's job to partner with developers to make it easy to deliver the missing middle. So with that, I'd like to open up to questions and any discussion. Comments, questions? Anybody challenged by their own efforts locally to undertake some of these more micro-level strategies and you want some feedback? Shannon. So let me repeat that in a sense. So you've got, to the extent public funds or assets are being used for private benefit, you can't gift those public assets over for private benefit. Every state, by the way, has that. I mean, that's absolutely a bottom line requirement. The state statute in Texas, and I think many other states, have an alternative for the transfer of at least real estate that's publicly owned in either blighted areas or redevelopment areas, whether it's associated with tax increment financing or under other umbrellas, enterprise zones. And this is really important as new urbanists. These are the tools we need to really understand because they're frankly there and they're not being used. And that is, there's the concept of value for money. And this is a really important concept. And what the concept of value for money means is that you can show through the analysis all the other factors that long-term will add up to an outcome that still may have some externality value. That's the key. This is really, really super important, is that you have to do the analysis to show that just because all of the return is not internalized through specific dollar amounts back to the public side, but you can show actual value being generated through secondary and tertiary benefits, and you can quantify that. You can show that the value for money is not necessarily always high bid. And that's really an important tool to understand. However, you have to go through the analysis. You have to do the numbers. It's really important.